Right, good evening again and welcome. I am Dr. Deborah Johnson Blake, aka Dr. DJ, and I will be your event moderator this evening for the first of three Gwinnett County 2045 Unified Plan Speak Up Community Education Speaker Series. These series are designed to educate Gwinnett County residents, leadership, and planning professionals, as well as interested professionals outside the county, about exciting and innovative community planning concepts. I want to thank each of you for coming tonight, and I also want to thank everyone who was involved in this effort to bring our first Speaker Series event to fruition. And I just have a little housekeeping before I continue. If you haven't had an opportunity to use the restrooms, they are right outside the double doors, left, another left, and then they are on the left. So thank you for that. Tonight, we have two national experts who will share policy and planning solutions on housing and small-scale economic development relevant to Gwinnett County's local context and planning goals. We are happy to have you join us. But at this time, I'd like to ask Deputy Director Chris Hayward to come to the podium to bring you greetings and introduce Director Matt Elder. Thank you. Can you give him a warm welcome?
Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? So welcome everyone to our first Speak Up event to help develop Gwinnett's 2045 Unified Plan. As Dr. DJ mentioned, I'm Chris Hayward, Deputy Department Director for the Department of Planning and Development, Gwinnett County. I want to begin by thanking all of y'all for being here. I know you're all busy. You have families, you have careers. There are more movies and shows available to us at our fingertips than any time in history, but y'all chose to be here instead, learning more about planning and getting more engaged here in community. So thank you so much for that. We have a few great speakers lined up for you tonight. You're going to hear about the housing landscape in Gwinnett, the role of missing middle housing, and strategies to build up communities through reinvestment and collaborative partnerships. I think we're doing something new and special with this Speak Up event series. I've never heard of any city or county bringing in nationally recognized thought leaders to talk to staff, to residents, and to elected leaders about shared challenges and innovative solutions from across the country. Our focus tonight is going to be on economic development and housing. I'm guessing almost everyone here is invested in Gwinnett County in some way. You either live here, you work here, you have a child in school, or you own a business. You know that Gwinnett has some incredible strategic advantages that has brought you here. Our location, schools, parks, restaurants, and of course the people that live here all make Gwinnett special. But we have some challenges too. Most of Gwinnett is built out at this point, which means that the best locations for economic development projects often involve redevelopment. Redevelopment can be more expensive and complex, and developers will typically opt for a greenfield site if they have one available. We also have challenges related to housing. Gwinnett is such a great place to live that we continue to see strong increases in population, and that's driving demand to outpace the supply of available housing. And the end result of that, as we're all seeing, is housing prices continue to increase. And that's for housing that's, owner-occupied as well as rental housing. It's just across the board. Now, this is not unique to Gwinnett County. It's not unique to Metro Atlanta, but it's a challenge that we need innovative ideas to help solve. I want to encourage all of you to please stay engaged with the 2045 Unified Plan on social media, at our events, and on our website at gwinnettcounty.com/2045 Unified Plan. Share the information with your friends and your neighbors. This is your plan, and we really need to hear from you throughout this process. I'm now going to turn it over to our Housing and Community Development Division Director, Matt Elder, so he can talk to you about the housing landscape in Gwinnett County. Thank you.
Good evening. I am excited to be here with you all this evening to talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is housing, right? So, thank you. So, as Chris was kind of alluding to, Gwinnett County continues to be a place where people want to come, live, raise their families. Over the next 30 years, we are still projected through the most recent ARC population estimates to see more than 500,000 people come into the county, becoming the most populated county by 2050 in the entire state of Georgia. Why are people moving here? They're moving here for our award-winning parks, school systems, for our libraries, and for our community services that are available, but also because we have an engaged citizenry that's a part of the process, which is a part of why all of you are here tonight to be part of what the future of Gwinnett County is going to look like. This plan, 2045, is going to be ending right at the beginning of the peak of our projected growth over the next 30 years. So your involvement tonight and your input that you gave out in the lobby is a huge part of what success will look like for the county moving forward. But as you can see here on the chart, this is about what demand will look like as we move forward over the next 30 years. Population steadily increasing. Housing, and as complex as it is, can also be oftentimes be boiled down to a relatively simple supply and demand equation. So this is the demand side of the chart, and here's your supply. What you see on the chart in front of you is basically what the housing starts are, permits that are issued for housing in Gwinnett County from 1980 through 2022. And you can see the beginning part where prior to the Great Recession, we were averaging about 8,300 housing permits issued per year. And then right around 2008, it began to fall off the cliff as the Great Recession took place. Since then, from 08 to 22, we're issuing just about 3,200 housing permits per year, and that has begun to steadily increase over the last few years. But as you all know, the housing market is rather fickle at times, and it's gone up and down as we try to get it restarted and re-going. So, talk about housing supply and demand, but also important to talk about how old the housing is here in Gwinnett County. 78% of the county housing stock was built between 1980 and 2009. That surprises probably nobody in this room, as during the 90s, we were the fastest growing county by population in the entire country. However, what this chart doesn't depict for you is that 65+% of the county's housing stock will be over 30 years old over the course of this decade. I specifically picked 30 years old because it's a very important timeline for age of housing where the life systems in the house begin to go bad, if not well maintained or even replaced. Talking about roofs, HVAC systems, water heaters, not to even mention the appliances that are within the home, all of which are very expensive repairs and replacements to make. Some of you may have seen that just last week there was a report released that 2 in 3 Americans right now cannot afford a $400 bill should it suddenly appear to them. I can assure you, as many of you probably have known if you choose to replace these things in your homes, a roof, HVAC, or a water heater is a heck of a lot more than $400. And that inability to afford these kind of repairs, if you have not been able to maintain your homes, puts them at risk of becoming dilapidated or in a state of disrepair. We also want to talk about the housing type we have here in Gwinnett County. While we've seen some growth over the last decade, specifically in the single-family attached and multifamily developments, we continue to be a county dominated by single-family detached housing. 72% of our overall housing is that single-family detached subdivision type of model. One of the fundamental parts of looking at housing from a complex conversation like we're having tonight is about the element of choice. People having the choice to not just where do they want to live, but what kind of housing do they want to live in? Where do they want to be located at? Is it the opportunity to live anywhere in the county in their type of housing they prefer? Is it rental? Is it ownership? All of these pieces can be further expanded by the ability to provide more housing choice by development. It's one of the things that we're most excited about hearing from our expert about missing middle housing a little bit later on tonight in terms of how we can further diversify and look at new options for housing solutions across the county. But of course, all of this boils down to everybody's favorite topic, which is the cost. So in front of you, you see a chart that has the median housing costs from January 2021 to April of 2023. In January 2021, the median housing cost here in Gwinnett County was $291,000. As of the end of April, it's $400,000, which is a more than 30% increase from where it was just 27 months ago, and all signs indicate that it will continue to increase as we move forward, despite rising interest rates, despite unpredictable economic conditions. We've seen that the dip that we saw in the fourth quarter of last year has already recovered back and is continuing to rise as we move forward. And we'll continue to monitor this as we move forward. But this housing cost chart is not just a result of the pandemic like many thought. It's not a transitory property. It is here to stay, and it is a direct result of the lack of supply with the overwhelming demand for more housing and new housing, both at the ownership and, of course, at the rental level too. As the rental chart has also followed the ownership chart in terms of rising. Traditionally in the world of housing, when the rental prices go up, ownership prices come down so that way they can counterbalance each other. It is a very unique phenomenon to see both housing costs from ownership and rental rise at almost the exact same rate over the exact same period of time. Similar to home ownership, we have not yet seen a slowdown in the rental price throughout the county. Right now, the average apartment in Gwinnett County costs $1,629 per month to afford just for rent, not even counting your utilities. This is a 31% increase from where it was in first quarter of 2019 before the pandemic. In order to afford that average rent, a household has to earn a minimum of $65,000 a year to afford a median rental option here in Gwinnett County. When you look at overall affordability, though, you see that more than 1 in 4 homeowners are currently in an unaffordable situation. And when I talk about affordable housing, what I'm talking about is a metric. Every person in this room, in this county, in this country should be striving to live in affordable housing, because all it means is that you are living in housing that is 30% or less of your gross monthly income. Affordable housing is not an income level, it's not a rental price or a purchase price. It is simply a metric by which we measure the affordability of housing to you as the household, not to anybody else. But 1 in 4 homeowners in Gwinnett County right now are living in unaffordable housing. Over half the renters, 56%, are living in unaffordable housing. And overall, that's at 38% when you combine ownership and renters. And I realize 38% is not like a big number. So I pulled the numbers for other counties of our size: St. Louis, Denton, Marion, Pinellas, Erie, and Fulton. We have the second highest percentage of homeowners in unaffordable housing and the highest percentage of renters in unaffordable housing amongst all 10 of those communities. All of them is the exact same size and the exact same housing stock type. Many of you have read our housing study that we produced last year, and it identified that in order to meet the market demand, we have to be able to produce an average of just over 15,000 units per year to meet the current levels of demand. You saw the growth chart in the very beginning. 500,000 more people are coming over the next 30 years. They need places to stay. They need housing to live in. They need elements of choice and diversity of their options. We anticipate that about 12,000 of these units will be in the unincorporated parts of Gwinnett, with an additional 2,800 coming in the municipalities. This is a conversation for all. This isn't a county conversation or a city conversation. This is a conversation for our entire community coming together to devise solutions that will work for all of us. But it's important in the housing gap to look at not just the amount of units we need, but sometimes where those units are being produced at. As you can see, not one of the income brackets on this chart is reaching even half of its current demand for housing. Even the upper income bracket, 23% of those who are households over $100,000 a year are currently having their housing demand met on an annual basis. In that 50 to 100,000, the middle income bracket, just 43%. And then as we get down to the lowest bracket, those earning below $50,000 a year, only 2%, or 89 units a year, are being produced as housing for that income level. This is where the 15,000 units per year demand comes in from our gap analysis. But we wanted to close on a high note, and a positive way of going into our next speaker, and talk about what are we already doing, what's happening on the ground today. What are you here to be a part of? The first is that we established the Housing and Community Development Division last August. I'm very blessed and fortunate to be here in front of you as this division director. I have a number of my staff here in the crowd who are a wonderful, amazing group who's doing incredible work to serve this community overall, to address both our housing and our community development needs across the county. We developed the Housing Action Plan, which is an accompaniment 1 to 2 year plan with strategies and goals to our comprehensive housing study. County leadership from the chairwoman down to the board of commissioners has been very consistent that they didn't just want a study to be produced to just put it on a shelf and collect dust. They wanted actionable items to be taken in short order with long-term objectives in mind to be able to move forward on it. We recently accepted into the Georgia Initiative for Community Housing. Gwinnett County is part of its 2023 cohort, a 3-year program where we'll work alongside communities across the state, along with UGA and the Department of Community Affairs, to learn from experts about localized housing solutions. I think everyone in here can agree that the needs in Norcross are not the same as the needs in Lawrenceville or Beaufort. So we need to develop localized solutions for what fits the community on the ground, not just what fits the community as a whole. And then we're currently working on updated Unified Development Ordinance amendments that will broaden zoning categories and create opportunities for further diversification of housing. Those will be going in front of the board this summer for a vote. That's why this conversation is so timely and why your participation is so integral to that process. And then lastly, our division currently has more than $11 million committed to develop more than 400 affordable units over the course of the next couple of years. 86 of those units will be home ownership units for sale for first-time homeowners who are in the lower income brackets. And then 328 of those units will be for rental, scattered throughout multiple properties across the entire county, not concentrated in any one area or not set aside for any one income level. These are reserved for incomes from 30% of area median income all the way up to 80, providing diversity of choice, diversity in housing type, and most importantly, diversity in geography of where they're located at. Once again, we want to thank you all for being here and being a part of this conversation. We really appreciate each one of you giving us your evening tonight, and we look forward to the conversation and sharing it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Matt Elder and Deputy Director Chris Hayward, for your remarks and service. Now I would like to introduce our first speaker. Yes, Khaliff Davis, Managing Director of Structured Finance at the Reinvestment Fund. Khaliff Davis is the Managing Director of Structured Finance at Reinvestment Fund. He has over a decade of experience in mission-based investing and field building initiatives in the education, housing, and social services sectors. As the Managing Director, Mr. Davis leads the strategy, management, and expansion of the Reinvestment Fund's national lending and investment programs. Additionally, he leads the product development and innovative processes on behalf of Reinvestment Fund and RFIA, the Reinvestment Fund's registered investment advisor. He joined Reinvestment Fund in 2017 and has played various roles, including leading the K-12 education portfolio and establishing Reinvestment Fund's presence in the Southeast. Prior to joining the Reinvestment Fund, he was an associate at Capital Impact Partners. Mr. Davis is a chartered financial analyst. He holds a Master of City and Regional Planning from the Georgia Institute of Technology and a BA in Economics from the University of Pennsylvania. He volunteers with Lead Atlanta and serves on the board of Resurgence Hall, a K-8 school in South Atlanta. He is a member of the Lead Atlanta class of 2022 and regularly advocates for high-quality education in the metro Atlanta area. Please join me in welcoming Khaliff Davis to the podium.
So let me get some logistics done first. So let me see if I can switch slides. Perfect. Awesome. So good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be invited to speak to you all today. And I want to thank everyone who contributed to making this event possible, including the county commissioners, county staff, and the many others who rolled up their sleeves to do the work of real community building. I also want to thank Matt, Chris, Dr. DJ, Nick, and others who made this all possible. I'm really impressed, right? Dr. DJ noted that I'm a planner by trade, and the work that you all did to kind of make this happen is truly inspiring, and I think it's a gift to the residents. And so I'm really appreciative to join you all and speak today. And since I'm local, I am excited to join other engagements that you all are planning. So before I dig into the details of my presentation, I do want to make my obligatory spiel. My team would be really upset if I didn't, and share some background on the organization that I'm a part of. So as Dr. DJ mentioned, I am the Managing Director of Structured Finance at Reinvestment Fund, which is a mission-driven financial institution committed to making communities work for not just some people, but all people. And at our organization, we bring both financial and analytical tools to partnerships that work to ensure that everyone has access to essential opportunities. Every day, we have the opportunity to support partners working toward meaningful outcomes of community building, such as investing in affordable places to live, accessing nutritious food and health care, building schools where children can flourish, and investing in strong local businesses that support good jobs. Each of our 4 business lines add a unique perspective for stakeholders wanting to create and implement useful interventions in communities across the country. For instance, our lending and investment group, which I am a part of, uses capital as an agent of positive change, tailoring financing that supports the various needs of the built environment. We also have a research arm called Policy Solutions, which is a team that creates data-informed tools and analytics that highlight ways to drive capital and resources towards equitable policies and economic development. We also have a team that understands that not every finance solution can be supported by debt and equity. And in those cases, we have a capacity building and grant program that complement our core skill sets of lending and research. And lastly, we have an affiliate called Policy Map, which combines easy-to-use online mapping with data on demographics, real estate, health, jobs, and more in communities across the country. Combined, all the work we do builds toward a vision where everyone has the opportunity to live in a neighborhood that is vibrant, healthy, safe, and joyful, no matter their upbringing and background. I am a firm advocate of the vision, and quite honestly, my desire to work toward that vision really got its start right here in a local school not too far from this one in this county. So if you aren't able to tell, this is me on the screen about a decade ago as a classroom teacher, and that was my class. I was a 3rd grade elementary school teacher at Rockbridge Elementary School. And at the time, I had no idea that my experience with these students would literally change my life and guide me on the path that I am in today. So a little over a decade ago, like I said, I was hired to work as an elementary school teacher at Rockbridge Elementary in Norcross, right off the Jimmy Carter corridor. And while there, I was really enamored by the community and deeply respected the work everyone contributed to create a joyous environment for the children that attended the school. The opportunity to teach willing and sometimes not so willing students lessons they will carry with them throughout their life automatically made my time there worth it. Though what made my time there extra special to me was the acceptance and tolerance of diversity in all its forms. As many of you know, the Jimmy Carter corridor has a level of racial, ethnic, religious, and political diversity unmatched by other places in the state. And that level of diversity was on full display at the school. Students, families, and staff came from all different backgrounds, and despite their differences, managed to form a loving community committed to preparing children for a future of their choosing. Families were active supporters of their kids' education. They made food. I mean, the first time I ate flan was at Rockbridge. They volunteered time at various events, or they just showed up just to say hello. Families made every effort to serve as allies to their child's education. However, despite the love and support from those inside the building, there were far too many reminders that external forces outside of the building impacted students and their families in a way that made their futures a lot more precarious. For instance, I didn't have the opportunity to teach quite a few of the students that were in my class in the start of the year all the way to the end of the year. Why? Because housing around the school grew to be unattainable to many of those families. And while in pursuit of stable housing, many of the students I taught were no longer able to attend Rockbridge just because their new home wasn't in the school's attended zone anymore. Imagine the disruption having to move mid-year causes to a child's learning outcomes. Zoom out and imagine the disruption it causes to a school, its staff. I sincerely applauded my peers back then for the work in achieving learning despite those circumstances. I also had experiences where students would covertly secure 2, 3, maybe even 4 extra snacks. I would ask why, and they would reply that they planned to save the snacks until they got home to give them to their hungry siblings. Again, imagine what type of stress that might bring to a child. At the time, I highly doubted learning fractions was more important to them than securing food for their next meal. What I learned from my experience as a teacher is that major shocks in a household very rarely happen in a silo. Access to housing, education, and so on are not separate issues and are very much interrelated, particularly when you think about a household's ability to thrive. I left my experience as a teacher scratching my head seeking answers to questions I had around the notion of place and what it means for people of diverse backgrounds to thrive in a community. I also left the classroom thinking about how community groups, governments, and other agents add or take away the ability for people of all kinds to live in a place. Fast forward to today, I'm still left pondering the same questions. And students like the kids in my classroom, or children like the kids in my classroom, are also faced with those challenges. However, I do have some observations to share that I've gained over the years that can at least serve to inspire the work this community is doing to create a place where diversity is valued and used as a strength in pursuit of worthwhile goals like economic growth, regional competitiveness, and equity. The strategies I plan to share during the next few slides support a built environment that enhances the quality of life, not just for residents that communities want to attract, but also supports an enhanced quality of life for existing residents and those that also seek refuge in places they want to live in. So, while there are proven interventions out there that work to enhance the quality of life for all people, Matt, he raised that Gwinnett County still must contend with some pretty serious headwinds complicating those interventions. Put another way, the pursuit of equitable economic growth is as challenging today as it was a decade ago. For instance, the makeup of our household looks different than it did in prior generations. Y'all know, the boomer generation is only getting older, and they have very diverse perspectives on where and how they want to live. Meanwhile, younger generations are delaying family planning, while others are locked out of local real estate markets altogether due to housing's increased costs and the general lack of supply. These demographic shifts require new housing types specifically, but more generally, a multi-pronged approach to assessing market trends at the neighborhood block level and designing economic development solutions tailored across similar neighborhood blocks. Another challenge specifically facing growing suburban geographies like Gwinnett County is that access and growth of critical services like transportation, the provision of medical care, and child care severely lags population growth. That means critical services and wraparound supports that could help suburban residents weather periods of instability may be harder to access or are entirely missing in certain areas of the region. And lastly, change happens quickly and is often highly volatile because growing economic interconnectedness across the globe, but also because of how financial processes have sped up the reconfiguration of housing development and ownership at a large scale. For example, financialization today extends more assertively into real estate and rental housing markets, making residents more vulnerable to the ups and downs of the business cycle. So, on this slide, I want to further drive home the point, the need for a multi-pronged economic development strategy. This slide shows two maps of Gwinnett County that spatially identifies the level of household income by census tract. To the left, the map shows the estimated percent of all households with incomes of $50,000 or less. The darker the purple, the higher the percentage of households whose incomes are at most $50,000. To the right, the map shows the estimated percent of all households with incomes of $150,000 or more. The darker the purple, the higher the percentage of households whose incomes are more than $150,000. You get the gist. What's made evident by these two maps is that Gwinnett County is comprised of many residents along the socioeconomic spectrum. However, lower income residents and higher income residents are highly concentrated in separate areas of the county. This means to me that a one-size-fits-all approach wouldn't work. Matt just said it. With a county with such a heterogeneous mix of people, places, and needs. The heterogeneity necessitates public officials and their stakeholders to act more precisely with tools that target specific interventions in specific markets. One tool that is helpful to better understand community context and developing specific solutions for that context is the market value analysis, or MVA, developed by the team at Reinvestment Fund. The MVA is a data-based, stakeholder-validated examination of a jurisdiction's residential real estate market and how those markets are impacted by certain phenomena, such as racial integration, mortgage denial rates, investor-owned activity, and other such phenomena. The MVA provides stakeholders with a common understanding of the range of market types that allows public, nonprofit, and community organizations to engage in productive dialogue around the creation of a coordinated investment and service delivery strategy. It can also be used as a baseline against which community change and investment can be measured over time. Reinvestment Fund, as you can see here, has completed dozens of MVAs for different jurisdictions who use the tool to create useful interventions such as developing local land banking strategies, benchmarking quality of life measures, or targeting development incentives to certain places and to certain groups. We actually just got finished doing one in Nashville, which, as you all know, has a lot of the same issues affecting Gwinnett in terms of growth. But quite frankly, it's off the charts. And a variety of different stakeholders came together, from government entities, state, federal, and local, to local developers, planners, and they all got together to kind of assess down to the block level what's happening in Nashville. So it's a good tool. So we all know access to critical services like childcare is vitally important to leading a stable life that is of quality. However, far too often, access to services is not equal in all communities. For instance, I'm expecting a child later this year, and in my search for quality childcare, it's dizzying to me the level of disaggregation experienced in the sector. I am super thankful that I live in a neighborhood with many options for childcare. But however, as you see on the map shown, some in the region are living in areas without ready access to quality childcare. In fact, some estimates show that the existing level of childcare supply leaves roughly 1/3 of the region's demand potentially unmet. This estimate is really worrisome, since many of us know that childcare is essential in determining the desirability of a place, the ability of a place to contribute to a better quality of life, and the ability for working families to join and remain in the workforce. Since 2014, Reinvestment Fund's program called the Fund for Quality has been making investment to support the expansion of high-quality child care centers throughout Philadelphia. Through the provision of business planning support and facilities-related financing, the Fund for Quality supported high-quality early care providers with expanding their services to reach more low-income families. The program was made possible by local philanthropy, but we've seen cities support these types of programs too. In June of last year, the mayor of Atlanta actually announced a $20 million investment in child care in the city. And the money would pay to refurbish centers in the city, help families afford child care, and to even pay teachers bonuses. With the average monthly cost of child care at about $1,000 per child in Georgia, many families would find that unaffordable. Not having access to child care can keep people willing to work out of jobs, draining the local economy of talent and diminishing the quality of life of those in need. My last set of comments stresses the importance of coordinating efforts at all levels of government to create a regulatory structure that incentivizes the right type of private market activity. The map shown portrays the level of activity MV Realty has in certain areas of the region. The larger the circle, the more activity in a given area. So as you can see a lot of activity in South Fulton, Clayton County, South DeKalb. You see pockets of activity in Gwinnett as well, and other places throughout the region. MV Realty is a company based in Florida that advertises a homeowner benefit program that hands out cash to homeowners ranging from $300 up to about $5,000, depending on the value of one's home. In exchange, MV Realty has the exclusive right to sell one's home for 40 years. I repeat, MV Realty has the exclusive right to sell one's home for 40 years. Homeowners who try to withdraw from the program find themselves at risk for substantial penalties at up to 10 times their original payment, or risk being blindsided with a mortgage placed against the property. That's ridiculous. For $300, 10 times that to get out of a contract or else have a lien on your property, that's bad business. Lawsuits have been filed in Florida, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania to curb the activity, but unfortunately, Georgia homeowners, particularly those who are older or with fixed incomes, are still susceptible to the program. The Attorney General is currently investigating the matter right now, but there's been no official lawsuit at the moment. So tell your neighbors, tell your friends, this is going on, not just in other parts of the region, but in your community too. Targeted government incentives have powerful sway to curb predatory practices like those implemented by MV Realty, and that make local economies more resilient. Incentives should be targeted to focus on strong and emerging economic clusters and vulnerable populations. For instance, the city of Philadelphia implemented a program to help homeowners with aging homes access extremely low interest loans to invest in their properties. For large-scale holistic development in distressed neighborhoods, the city of Atlanta formed an entity that utilizes federal tax credits called the New Markets Tax Credit Program to attract private capital to fund neighborhood revitalization and job creation prospects. Also back in 2022, Washington, D.C. provided over $2.5 million in funding for the establishment of an accessory dwelling unit program. The initiative supported the creation of residential accessory apartments at existing residential properties throughout the district, adding much-needed housing stock to the region, which Nathan will speak to probably in the next in his talk. And lastly, CDFIs regularly leverage a variety of funding sources to activate small-scale, sustainable development ecosystems that increase the inventory of available housing types. The beauty about CDFIs is that they are generally in it for the long haul and don't pull back their investments when the economy contracts. All of these different initiatives have in common the fact that they are targeted to specific populations living in jurisdictions that may be more vulnerable to shocks that can affect the level of stability of those in the targeted groups. So, I want to end with this quote. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. Any of those strategies that I shared in isolation are far too simple, and it's not going to move the needle. But if you're thoughtful, you bring all of those strategies together and then some, and you're dedicated for the long term, you can meet the needs of everyone who calls this place home. Thank you.
Thank you, Khaliff. Your keen insight and presentation was awesome. Please join me in giving him another round of applause. We're going to reserve our questions until after our next speaker speaks. And now I would like to introduce our second speaker, Nathan Wildfire, co-founder and CEO of the Missing Middle Housing Fund. Originally from Pittsburgh, Nathan Wildfire has worked in community and economic development in Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Oregon for over 20 years. His interest in housing dates back to watching his grandmother create rural, adorable senior housing in Pennsylvania when he was very young. Throughout his career, he has worked for nonprofits and governments at multiple scales, and even attempted to create a housing startup from his basement during the pandemic. All the interests of merging innovation, economics, and bettering people's lives. As the co-founder and CEO of the Missing Middle Housing Fund, he works to solve Oregon's housing underproduction crisis. The Missing Middle Housing Fund directly supports housing development projects for those making between 80% and 120% of area median income or workforce housing, and serves as an incubator for innovation that cuts the cost to deliver those new homes. Nathan also founded the Local Homes Network, which is evolving housing creation from projects to products by innovating the designs, materials, processes, and financing that deliver the world's most cost-efficient, sustainable housing solutions, and develop a network of developers, architects, construction companies, product suppliers, material suppliers, and educational institutions that will create the housing supply chain of the future. In his spare time, he leads a community choir, spends time outside with his wife, Jillian, and observes as much about trees and baseball as humanly possible. Join me in welcoming Nathan Wildfire to the podium. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm going to use this one, which is on, right? Can you guys hear? Okay, so you heard that I'm from Pittsburgh, so I have a little bit of a confession to make. I grew up in the 80s and early 90s, so unfortunately the Atlanta Braves knocked out the Pittsburgh Pirates 2 consecutive years from making the World Series, so I just can't enjoy your baseball team. However, some of my favorite athletes growing up were Deion Sanders and Dominique Wilkins, so hopefully you don't take my Pittsburgh roots against me. I like to start every one of my talks about housing by really focusing on humans, the people that we usually build homes for. What's the biggest check most of us write every month? It's usually our rent or our mortgage. Does anyone here in this room know anyone that struggles with housing? I've got a lot. Look around, look at all the hands up. It's almost everybody. I'm going to start by talking about my choir, that community choir. Last night we had our last rehearsal before our spring concerts. So yes, I was in Oregon last night, and now I'm here today. Scott is a barber, and he's in my choir. And when the pandemic hit, his barber shop closed, and so he moved back to Montana. I lost a tenor. Sean is a bass. He sings real low. And Sean is a machinist. He works in a factory, and he had to move about an hour away. He's still in the choir, but he now drives an hour to get to Portland because the housing costs are so high. Lottie lost her job in retail, went back to school in Texas. Kat, these are real people, by the way. Kat's an alto. She lives out near the coast now in a pretty terrible housing situation because the store she worked in closed, and she couldn't afford the housing prices in Portland any longer. Bayer is a baker. Lindsay works in senior care. They're in their late 30s. They're not in any kind of romantic relationship at all, but they're roommates now because they could no longer afford to live on their own. My choir started with 20 people before the pandemic, and at our rehearsal last night, we could now fit in my house for rehearsal. We're down to 10. I'm very proud of them, but the housing crisis is personal to me. My community is that choir. That's one of my communities, and I'm sure you have communities like that in your lives. We don't often think about the consequences of not producing enough housing when the place we live is full of economic vitality, but some of those consequences mean your community breaks. They move away. They can't afford what to do. And so I always like to start with the faces of our housing crisis. Over the last 3 years, we've come to know the term essential workers, but we don't build housing for those essential workers, almost ever. We heard a lot of the stats earlier, just a little bit about Oregon. I just learned like 3 days ago the Atlanta metro has 6-ish million people. The whole state of Oregon has 4 million people. We got a lot of empty space out there. Come visit, it's wonderful. But cost burden means you spend more than 30% of your income on your mortgage or your rent. That means you're cost burdened by your housing. And in Oregon, we have 500,000 folks like that. On the West Coast, which you might hear a lot about in terms of the housing crisis, there's over 6 million people the size of your metro are house insecure. Nationwide, that's a 33 million person problem. On a great year, we build 20,000 units in Oregon. This year we'll build 13,000. That's everything. That's your mansions, to your accessory dwelling units in the backyard, to your granny flat above the garage, to your apartment, high rises. It's everything. At best, we build 20,000 units a year. We'll build 13,000 this year. In Oregon, sometimes in a day, 3,000 houses burn. That's a thing that happens. I know here in Georgia, sometimes floods happen, hurricanes happen, droughts are increasingly a real thing. Housing insecurity and not having enough housing is even worse when you have a natural disaster of any kind. Sometimes those natural disasters are pandemics that no one sees coming, and all of a sudden the cost of timber or lumber or screws goes up by a factor of 10, and you stop producing the housing you used to. To meet our demand, we need to be building 40,000 units of housing a year in Oregon. You saw a stat earlier about your county. You need to be at 15,000, but I saw you produced about 3,500 units of housing last year. So that's a magnitude of plus 4 times. How can you possibly produce 4 times as much housing as you're already doing? How can Oregon more than double it? It's hard. It's tough. But the consequence of not building, your average sales price now is up around $400, as you just heard a little bit ago. That's going to keep climbing. In Portland, we're up to $550,000 per house. Our average rents are now $1,900. How does my choir live? They don't. They move away. Consequence, we already heard a little bit about the personal stuff, but every talk I've ever gone to with an economist, the state economist in Oregon, he gives the same speech every year. Hey, everyone, for the 10th consecutive year, the number one barrier to hiring and retaining employees is housing. It's not finding the right skills, it's not finding the right person. It's the ability of the potential hire or the person already in the job to afford to live near their job. This might not feel that real, but I saw you all raise your hand at the beginning. It's a huge impact. And so, by the way, number 2 is daycare. We heard a little bit about that earlier too. Access to daycare is the second biggest barrier to growing and hiring employees. If you can't hire, your company stagnates, and eventually you might leave, or you might open your second location somewhere else where you can find better, more workers because they can afford to live. We have a creamery. They make great cheese. I eat more dairy than any adult you know. But they make great cheese, ice cream, milk. It's called Tillamook Creamery. It's on the coast of Oregon. And in their town, they've had 80 open jobs for over 3 years because they are about to hire somebody to work for $90K a year, and they show up and there's literally nowhere to live. They have less than 0.5% vacancy, or the product is so bad and so highly priced that that very skilled worker from anywhere else in the country shows up and says, wow, I can live this close to the ocean. I can have this job with such a great company, and they're at the cutting edge of technology and free ice cream. And they say, I'm not taking the job because I can't find a place to live. You, like every county in America, are, whether you like it or not, in a competition with all the others. And should you continue to underproduce housing, like my county in Oregon, you too will start to feel that loss of jobs, of vitality, of people. Why is it so hard? Don't worry, you're not supposed to read this. It's just supposed to look confusing. Why is it so hard to build housing? There's regulatory policy hurdles. There's the high cost of timber and screws I just told you about. There's the fact that most of our contractors and construction workers have an average age of 57 in America. We don't create enough people who want to work with their hands anymore. The cost to finance the creation of new housing has skyrocketed. With interest rates going up, it's now almost impossible to get a construction loan. There's so many things working against you, and I regret to tell you there's no silver bullet to solving your housing underproduction crisis. But there might be silver buckshot. If you take enough crazy ideas, right, the spaghetti against the wall, some of it's going to stick. And it turns out everywhere I look, in Oregon but also nationwide, I see hope and I see innovation. So if I was to ask almost any, is anyone in here a general contractor or a sub? Okay. So then I can say this and none of you will challenge me. It's great. If I ask almost any general contractor anywhere, and I say, what is your biggest barrier to producing more housing faster and for less, they will always give the same answer, and it's labor. They can't find enough people to actually fulfill the work that folks want them to do. There's demand everywhere for their services, but they literally can't find enough humans to show up. They're skilled enough to deal with the new materials, new designs, new assembly methods. That's the number one. If I talk to any local developer, so not a general contractor, but a developer. Anybody in here a developer? Oh yeah, all right. Most local developers, not going to put this on you, most local developers will say it's that darn red tape. Everything takes forever. Zoning's terrible. The permitting environment is awful. It takes me 14 months to get through a wetlands delineation study, whatever that is. It's terrible. I can't get, it's City Hall is just making everything drag out. The appeals process is terrible. And they would be right? Time adds money, just like the general contractor was right. But if I talk to any national developer, they're not going to talk about regulations and policy. They're not going to talk about workforce. They're going to say it's finding money. It's the cost of capital. No one will give a construction loan right now. Maybe there's equity out there, but they say I have to deal with the local buzzsaw of regulation and bureaucracy no matter where I go. I have to find humans to hire no matter where I go. But everywhere I go, I can't find capital. Construction and how we build homes is one of the least innovative industries of the last 100 years. We mostly build homes the same way we've done it for about 100 years. I'll tell you about some exceptions to that in a minute. But every time there is an exception, a new material, a new design, a new assembly method, something coming out of, who knows, some garage in Palo Alto, probably more like Gwinnett County. They're all illegal. No one will fund it because it's newfangled and weird, so they're not going to actually give you money to build it. The people who swing the hammers don't know how to use the new material or the new assembly method, and it's literally illegal, like by every zoning code and permitting code. So we don't innovate. We don't figure out ways to build faster and for less. I'm here to tell you that in your county, you have this visioning process occurring, and one of the folks that I think must be at that table is your employers. Employers generally have like 4 things that are critical for the housing conversation, but like Tillamook Creamery in Oregon, they don't think about housing being their biggest barrier. They think about, how do I make more yogurt? Big, huge, oh, that's them, by the way. Come out and visit me. We'll get some cheese curds. Really, they have 4 big things. They have need, right? Because that biggest barrier to hiring and retaining employees is housing, access to housing. But they have 3 other things. They usually have land. Sometimes it's weird and it's not zoned right for housing, but they often have it. They usually have capital, or at least a balance sheet that they can leverage to put dollars into a deal. And they have political clout. So if the 6 largest employers in any of your cities or unincorporated land in Gwinnett said, we want X, it would probably happen. Because they're important. They employ so many of us, right? So they have power, they have land, they have a need, and they sometimes have resources. These are the folks that sometimes have to move at the speed of business. Well, they always have to move at the speed of business, but they had a crisis yesterday. It might not always feel to all of us in this room like there is a housing crisis. They feel it first, because they can't hire. This is a people problem, just like my choir for them. So Mount Bachelor is a ski resort. It's on a big old volcano out in Oregon. And they had to shut down 12 days last winter because ski bums could not afford to live in Bend, the city where Mount Bachelor is. GK Machine is in a rural part of Oregon. They make agricultural manufacturing equipment globally. And they got so fed up with, they know that if you have a 45-minute commute to work, you last about 18 months. And all that training that they did to get you ready to make their machinery is wasted because they leave. They go to get a different job closer. And so they're actually building like the company town of this century. We used to have a lot of those. They're just doing it. They have land. They're just building their own housing and leasing it to their employees or selling it. I already talked to you about Tillamook. These are community colleges, big economic drivers of our counties in Oregon, and they talk a lot about living, loving, learning communities. So community colleges have been pretty decimated by the high cost of housing. One of the first things to go, if you are cost burdened, is your ability to go to school. And so the people they serve and the people that work there are generally squeezed by the housing crisis. And so they have started to say, well, we got land, and we have folks working in gerontology, senior citizens, and we have folks working with kids, and we have folks working with construction. What if we combined all of that into an asset for our campus, something that earned us money as a community college, but now we have seniors living above a daycare. The daycare takes care of the kids that work at our actual university. It's like a living, loving, learning community. So these are real things. This is a dental manufacturer. I think it's actually the biggest one in the world. And this is a retirement community of 400 seniors. And each of them said, we have a giant problem in this more rural, sort of exurby community of Portland. And they said, we're just going to raise money from the state, and we're going to just figure out how to build housing. Spoiler alert, they hired us. But they couldn't wait any longer. It was people were leaving their companies. You know what they do, Friendsview? Friendsview took a unit that usually goes to a senior, and there's like a little local university in their town, and the unit was vacated, and they said, hey, 3 university students, you can live here for free during the summer instead of going home to mom and dad or whoever, but you got to work part-time for us. That was their housing solution. That's, pretty creative, but that's 3 months, and they're desperate. And that's also now a unit that's not serving a senior because they don't have any other options. So, innovators, these are logos, so I'm not going to spend too much time because logos aren't that sexy, to be honest. But sometimes it's Anderson Construction or Walsh Construction. They're mega, giant home builders, affordable housing builders, and they had a secret sauce for 20 years inside their company, but they don't really have an incentive to share it. Right? They have a way to cut the cost to build homes by 20%. We're working with them to try to actually say, hey, you should share this. There's more than enough work for everyone to do. Let's make housing go faster, and they're doing it. Quantum Assembly and Mods, they build homes in factories. So instead of sending a crew out, maybe it takes 6 months, you're banging things together in the rain. They're doing it in a factory. It's the same standardized design over and over, boom, boom, boom. They can reduce costs by 40%. And then in the case of Quantum, it's all metal. It's like a house made of metal. It's pretty interesting. It's fireproof, which is important in Oregon. Also, they tested bulletproof. Don't know why they tested that. And Mods is more panelized wood. Sometimes it's not the stuff you actually make. Sometimes the innovation is more like Alpha Ledger, which is municipal bond financing. Not everyone's favorite topic, but anytime you have to build a road or a sewer or a utility line for new housing, it costs a municipality a lot of money. And the usual way they pay for that is a bond. They borrow money, and then it gets paid back over time somehow. There's lots of ways to do it. But if the cost of the bond is really high, they have 2 options. Don't do it, or put that cost onto the developer. And the developer is going to, a lot of times, just say, this is already high enough because I can't find enough people, the cost of financing is so high, regulations are terrible. No, I'm not going to build it. So the consequence is the same, they don't build. So Alpha Ledger has created essentially a tokenized blockchain. I'm not even going to go into what that is, but they've created a way to bypass Wall Street and offer investment bonds at far lower rates. Again, not quite as sexy as a bulletproof, fireproof metal house, but just as important to building homes. And keep going, to keep on time. That is the metal house. That's what that looks like. This is Mods PDX's factory, where they're rolling out homes inside a factory. This is an example of an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, just building homes in the backyard. A lot of times zoning doesn't allow for that, but it's a really important way to create density in communities and for your homeowners, another asset that generates income. These are homes built out of shipping containers. That's a house that's built out of geopolymer concrete building blocks. They look like Legos. And it's the same material that they built the Roman aqueducts out of. Almost all these are illegal in most places in Georgia. but they represent innovation, a different way to do things. And all of them reduce the cost and time to build by 20 to 50%, which is really important when we have to quadruple the rate of housing production. Okay, so this is just, Khaliff, I put mine at the end here. My board would similarly say, hey, make sure you talk about what you do. So the Missing Middle Housing Fund believes that our potential for people, places, and economies is only realized when everyone has a place to live that they can afford. What we do is we find those innovators across finance, public policy, materials, design, labor, and we connect them. Because sometimes Bob down in, my Georgia geography is real bad. Bob in Savannah, who's been building roof trusses for 40 years, doesn't really know Jen in Lawrenceville, right? And so, but Jen has a really good way of financing land. And they've both been doing it, and they're busy out of their minds. So we find them and we connect them, and by, silver buckshot, putting a couple innovations together, it starts to work. Employers and cities hire us to come in and create workforce housing strategies for their geographies and their economies. And this is what we try to do, reduce the cost and time so that housing is an asset to your community, not a reason to go somewhere else. This is, I don't know, maybe climate change versus this, maybe the two biggest issues of our day. I used to think housing was a problem that just afflicted big cities, the Atlantas of the world and the Portlands of the world, or my hometown Pittsburgh. It's not true. It's now every little town in Oregon. And I'm going to guess that it's here. It's here too. I mean, we just saw those stats at the beginning. So we kind of need everybody, because when you're working with silver buckshot, it's a lot of different tries, and a bunch of them are going to fail. But we have to have a mindset of try, a mindset of get to yes, because our communities are the things that start to suffer if we don't. I'm really proud of my choir. We're going to have great shows next week, but we really are half as big as we used to be, and that's because of the high cost of housing. So I would challenge you, but also remain inspired by the folks that are here tonight and the folks that have signed up to try to help. There's a lot of doers. Last little bit, and then I'll get off the stage. I guess I won't. I'm going to stay up here for questions. Pittsburgh is really proud of Mr. Rogers. If you don't know, Fred Rogers is from Pittsburgh. We have a giant statue of him in the downtown. And Mr. Rogers would always say, whenever there's a crisis, whenever something is hard, look for the helpers. And I think that actually applies in our housing under production crisis. It can feel overwhelming. How could we possibly create 150,000 new units of housing in the next decade? How could you go from 3,500 units a year to 10,000 or 15,000? It's daunting. But inspiration and innovation are everywhere we look. And you probably know them. They're your neighbors, your family, your community members, trying something different, trying something new. So even though the scale is daunting, remain inspired, please. This is us, Khaliff and I. If you try to get my business card later, I will tell you I don't have them because I forgot them. So write that down, but I'd love to talk to you more because we're increasingly now working in other states. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and some innovative opportunities to housing production. So thank you both. We're going to transition to the Q&A now. So get your questions prepared. And gentlemen, would you like some bottled water? Yeah. Okay. Get you ready here. Let's give them a round of applause again while they sit up here. Start answering some questions. So to start us off, Khaliff, I'll start with you. And matter of fact, let me make sure you have a mic. Do we have a second mic?
We can share.
Share. All right. So, Khaliff, looking ahead to our next speaker series engagement and focus on tools for environmental sustainability within the development, what are some ways you've seen housing and economic development incorporate environmental concerns or factors?
That's a really good question. I don't want to take up everybody's night because we can get into extreme detail on that and answering that question. But I will say, and Nathan alluded to this, one of the other biggest challenges is the climate change affecting not just our country, but our globe, the world. And if you wasn't paying, attention to, legislation that's, recently passed, the Inflation Reduction Act actually has within it billions and billions and billions of dollars directed to clean energy efficiency, resiliency, climate resilience, etc. If you look it up online, the EPA is currently accepting applications for coalitions, green banks, governments, states to receive some of that money to deploy in things like housing and other economic development strategies. I think just yesterday, I believe HUD even announced that there's going to be some money dedicated specifically for nonprofits who tend to serve as backbones of our communities to build resiliency that is important, right, to continue to be in this environment. And so, in fact, Reinvestment Fund is really thinking hard about how we can align, quite frankly, our clean energy investing work that we've been doing for the last 20 years, and align that more closely to our community development work in the sectors like education and housing and healthcare, et cetera. And we've been looking at models, for instance, like in New York, some pretty innovative financiers are incorporating energy efficiency in all of their underwriting, like all of it. And so they have underwriting guidelines. They also have incentives to support developers and other builders in creating more energy resilient buildings. And I also will end with this. There's this program out here called the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, or the CPACE program, which is a financing tool that different governments and jurisdictions can enable to attract private investors to invest in energy saving measures to buildings that different owners have in their stock. And it's really interesting. So the private investors, they provide the upfront financing, and then in the back end, the jurisdictions collect through a tax assessment payments that then go back to the private investors. And so it's a pretty innovative tool, and as Nathan kind of mentioned in his presentation, we need silver buckshot, right? So everything must work. Does that help?
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You have something you want to add to that?
Real quick.
Okay.
Okay, this is audience participation. This is just a yell out situation, okay? How much material do you think is wasted in the average creation of a housing unit? We're looking for a percent between 0 and 100. You just yell it out. I'm hearing a lot of 40. You're right. 30 to 40, if you know something I don't. talk to me after. It's just wasted. It's just thrown out. It's not even recycled. So like right off the bat, we're paying a lot because we're putting a lot of material and labor to work to create a unit of housing, and then we're just throwing 40% of it in the trash. Okay, next part. This is audience participation again. What is the one material in housing, so think like, what is a house made of, that produces the most carbon emissions? Nailed it. I heard concrete over there. It's concrete. So anytime you can get concrete out of a building or do something differently with a foundation or build out of a different material, again, you're impacting climate change. So I'm just throwing that out there because like we don't think about it that often, but a lot of sustainability things we take for granted are just not done in housing.
Well, thank you for that. You know, we learn something new every day, so if you didn't know that, that's why we have the experts here. So thank you for sharing that, both of you. Now, Nathan, I do have a question specific for you as well. What trends are you seeing in the housing type or living arrangements that you think are likely to stick around or gain momentum? That's part one. Part two is, which of those trends do you think Gwinnett County should be mindful of, and how should the county prepare?
Okay, so earlier we heard a word used, and the word was choice. If you think about it, when you're like, am I going to move somewhere, or am I going to move out, like when I moved out of my parents' home, right? And I was like, okay, first apartment time, what am I going to do? You don't always just move right next door to your job. You generally make your choice on a bunch of factors, right? Price, is it a cool, if you're 22-year-old Nate, are you walkable to a lot of bars? Like you're gonna make your decisions based on a lot of different things. Well, increasingly, when we create housing, we create almost the same thing over and over again right now, especially where I live in Oregon. It's a lot of what's known as like 4 or 5 or 6 over 1s. That just means it's 4 or 5 or 6 floors of apartments over 1 floor of retail. You've probably seen them around. And the reason those get produced a lot is it's really economical right now. There's a lot of financing tools. It's hyper dense. We've kind of optimized how to build that. And so that's a thing that like we now have, but it hasn't led to a lot of housing choice. Really, like, there's not a lot of new products being built. A lot of those slides I showed you, they're not up there. And so as a lot of places are doing visioning processes, like Gwinnett County, they're very purposefully saying, how do we build choice into our growing housing stock? Some people want a smaller, they call them tiny homes, because they're cheaper. They're usually easier to maintain. Sometimes folks on fixed incomes or folks who are older, that's like a really good product to have in the backyard while your kids are raising their kids in the house they grew up in, right? So that's like an example. Another example would be, I heard a lot here today about how single-family homes were a lot of the thing that you have built over the last couple decades here. But that might mean there's not a lot of apartments, one-bedrooms, efficiencies. The thing that, like, again, young me would get right out of college. I could never afford to buy a home here, 20 years, let alone 5 years ago. Like, I just can't. So if you're not creating that product at that price point, you're just not going to get that income or age of person. And so having choice has become a big trend, and those run the gamut. And so when you are thinking about how you want to evolve as a county, you need to make sure you're enabling choice, both in the type of product that's created and then what people want to live in. That's zoning codes, that's products, that's financing, that's everything. I have so many more, but I'll pause there.
Well, thank you for that. You have anything to add to that, Khaliff, before I open up the question and to the audience?
I'll just double down on the point that Nathan said. The point is about enabling, and to move forward further. enabling ecosystems in those various buckets that he mentioned. I tend to work with, developers who are innovative, financiers who are innovative, jurisdictions that are innovative and create their ecosystems to kind of think through, problem solve, strategize, useful solutions that can get to that choice that Nathan mentioned. And so, I just wanted to double down, enable ecosystems.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? If you do, please stand up and we'll bring a mic to you. Don't be shy. Awesome.
Good evening. My name is Samia, and I just have a question. You mentioned environmentally friendly and sustainable, and of course, the world is changing. I am from Africa, and I do know that sometimes in America, everything is what's happening locally, but then the world is moving globally. So I think while we're not innovating and learning from how the world is really getting into that sustainable solutions, I can give you an example. My home in Africa is built from mud bricks. Those mud bricks are just like that, exactly like that brick. It's locally made by the community, sustainable, waterproof, fireproof. It's like a thermostat, but it also doesn't get the percentage of concrete is 2%. So I'm just thinking, and the cost of building is cheaper, right? So if it works somewhere else, why is America developers always iffing what's happening outside of the world, and we just assume that we all know it all, right? We live in a space that is all clay, so why not move into using earth into building sustainably versus wood and other materials that will be costing us high? So I think, is there a solution really to solve poverty in America? That's my question I always think about when I see, people thinking about things that would never really make the bottom line. I'll give you an example. Clarkston is mentioned here. I am from that, I work in that community. And those homes, with all the respect to the developers who did an amazing job, but the community there cannot buy them. Clarkston is 1 mile by 1 mile. The housing stock there is different because 95% of the homes are apartment units. So when there is no inventory, the people that are buying and moving into these spaces don't look like those communities because they can't afford to own those. So what they do, they leave Clarkston and they move into Gwinnett, right? So I think it's about solutions and bringing tailored solutions really to solve poverty, because those 95% of people who live in those apartment buildings are my community, but they can't afford. Even that tiny homes is not a solution. But I do know we can work it in the rest of the world where, still live under the dollar, why America cannot find these solutions sustainably.
Oh my gosh. I think you need to be up here as an expert. There's a lot of nuggets in that. I would say first, yeah, you're right. I think the U.S. is behind the globe, the world, and we're running out of time to catch up, right? And I think folks like you and others, pushing particularly Gwinnett County and just thinking through other ways beyond what's happening in the country is super important. I think, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately, particularly in the context of Gwinnett, is developing solutions that are culturally affirming. I was about to share in my presentation that, one way that a community and a jurisdiction can kind of get together and think through solutions is, again, to kind of build an ecosystem that can cut through the clutter. So for instance, I've seen jurisdictions develop housing action plans, but I think I would suggest Gwinnett County go a step further and create a task force, a housing strike force or task force, right, that can implement that housing plan and pulls from various sectors, right? So you got the philanthropic sector, you got the corporate sector, you got the folks in the weeds and zoning, but you also have community residents, right? Particularly in this place, right, where diversity is valued and prized, to sit on that committee, sit on that task force, to say, hey, this is what we want, right? To enable the things that Nathan mentioned. And I think to top it off, I think particularly in the government context, you can get bogged down by bureaucracy. And what I've seen that can be pretty helpful to cut through the mess, to cut through the red tape, is to get a couple of staffers that are not necessarily in any particular department, but they have a mandate to support housing solutions and work with different departments to get there. So they have that mandate. They also have the standing. So maybe it's a set of commissioners saying like, hey, we create this staff person to look at to bring people together across, the school district, right, the planning department, et cetera, et cetera. So you can start focusing on solutions that are interrelated, right, and connected. Because I told you, a decade ago, I was a teacher. I was focused on education, but I couldn't teach students who weren't in my classroom, right? And so, everything is interconnected. So I think I might have strayed in answering your question a bit, but again, I think you probably need to be up here too. Important point, yeah.
So I heard two big questions in what you said. Excuse me if I get them wrong, but one is, why don't we do more of what we see around the world? And the other is like, what's around the world that we should be doing? And so like the why don't we, I have kind of three big reasons. There's laws, money, and like comfort or experience or skill are the reasons why new ideas happen, right? So a law enables it or prevents it from happening. People will fund it. They will give you money or lend it or invest. And then you've got people willing to take the risk to like do it a different way, right? It's a builder or a community member or a buyer or whatever. But, we created zoning and permitting and inspection law a long time ago for safety, but a lot of those tools have been pretty warped over the last 100 years to be tools of exclusion. So we're going to prevent certain types of housing because we know certain types of people. And when I say type, sometimes that's income, sometimes that's age, sometimes that's race. It's been very purposeful. We prevent these types of housing, and because that's what we do. And so that's a big legacy to unwind. Same with funding, right? Has anyone ever heard of the term redlining? We used to have banks literally draw red lines around certain neighborhoods that would say, don't lend here because, again, X terrible reasons. And so the consequence of that is that sometimes we do want to try something different, but we now have these tools, right? This zoning or this law or this funding that prevent us from trying something outside the box that might work great in 10 other countries. So that's a whole thing to unwind. And then the third piece of that is, do we have people that can actually do it? Do we have people that have the skills to build houses using mud bricks? Do we have people that have the skills to do manufactured timber that you would see in like Scandinavia? You get the idea. So, okay, today I saw a newspaper article. There's the largest manufactured timber company in the world is based in Finland, and they are opening a factory in Georgia. This was announced yesterday. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name or the place, but if you just Google Finland, manufactured timber in Georgia, I bet it'll pop right up. You all have supercomputers in your pockets, I'm guessing. So like that's an example of like a thing from another country that happens all the time that we just don't do here, right? I spent a little short stint of my life in Australia, and they build a lot of homes like the ones you're describing there, because it turns out if you use packed earth that's really thick, you have huge insulating properties when it gets so hot. in Australia. So there's like so many models, and some of those, again, are a little less fun to look at on a PowerPoint slide, like how Vienna, Austria subsidizes, this was just in the New York Times the other day, how they subsidize affordable housing is pretty incredible. We just don't do it here, like at all. It would be dead on arrival. So I think back to that piece of choice, like we need to enable choice in the materials we use, the way we finance, because like despite everyone's best efforts in the housing industry over the last 2 decades, and I mean it, like smartest people I know working so hard and so passionately, how could you say we've done anything other than fail if we're that far behind and our housing costs have skyrocketed that much? Shame on us for not looking at the rest of the world for good examples. I'll just hold it.
Stand up if you have a question, please.
We'll talk too.
Yes, thank you. Would you mind standing up so Nick can find you? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Aliza. I work with United Way. We are particularly interested in making sure that a child well-being happens in our community, because we believe that children who are well makes a community that is well. And so housing is a big part of what we're concerned about. I've recently learned, and I agree with you, what you said earlier about it takes really everyone. But you pointed out business specifically. But of course, the nonprofit world is there to help. And also the faith-based community is there to help. I think there's a lot to say about what they can bring to the table. And I'm wondering more about that, if you can either provide an example of successful ways that faith-based community has helped build and maintain affordable housing.
I love this one. Okay, so I used to live in Burlington, Vermont. For those of you that don't know, Vermont is like the least religious state in the country by every measure, which was weird for me because I grew up in a very strong faith-based house. And so I moved there, and all these churches, predominantly in Burlington, they were churches, they were dying. They were losing congregants, and yet at the same time, their mission to serve their community was really, really strong, and their congregants was really, really strong. And so they started to work with the Economic Development Agency of the city, that's who I worked for, and we started to actually realize, wow, you have more land than anyone. Churches own so much land. And so they very purposefully started to build housing on their land. And they could do it in a way that served their seniors. And it, wouldn't you guess, it started to bring in new congregants into their new members into their churches. And it was incredible. It was the biggest economic driver the city had seen in years, was just working with churches to actually build housing to serve the folks the churches served. It was awesome. And of course they could be nimble and they could be creative because they had nothing to lose. They had a mission from God and they were going to do it. When I lived in Pittsburgh, I worked with this group of 6 faith-based communities. So it was a temple, a Muslim temple, a Jewish temple, and 4 churches. And they would raise dollars to contribute to building and rehabbing homes for lower income folks in their community so that they could remain members of their community. But the twist, the innovation, was that the dollars paid for very skilled craftspeople, and then the labor was the members of those faith communities. So the very skilled craftspeople showed up and would teach framing, for instance. And then it was like an urban barn raising. And I think every year they built, it was a smaller community, 12 blocks by 20 blocks, but they ended up building, I think, 5, 6, 7 homes a year. So it's small, but every bit counts, right? And now in Oregon, so you're getting 3 states here, In Oregon, we're actually working, the biggest faith community in Oregon is the Catholic Church. And so we're working with the Catholic Diocese, which owns land everywhere across Oregon, to actually start building housing in mostly it's small rural places, small rural towns on their land, because sometimes it's the only land left. So I come find me afterward. I get really jazzed about it. I think it's really exciting.
Awesome. You have anything to say, Khaliff?
So yeah, Nathan mentioned the faith-based, community providing housing, and I see a lot of those examples as well. But I wanted to touch on the nonprofit community as well. A few years ago in Atlanta, actually, Reinvestment Fund worked with a nonprofit called PCCI, where their main aim is to end homelessness and provide social supports to support that mission. They are not housers, they are not developers by any stretch of the imagination, but they had a building and they had some land. Actually, if any of you all are on 85-75 connector, you will see southbound a Coca-Cola sign that's been there for like decades. PCCI actually has a building that's right under that Coca-Cola sign. They said, what can we do to support the folks that we're serving every day and get them housed and activate the land that they have to do that. What they eventually did was partner with a nonprofit housing developer called Mercy Housing, who actually has an office here in Atlanta, and they developed a partnership where, in exchange for the land that PCCI provided, Mercy was able to take that land and develop meaningful, attainable housing on that plot, just as long as it didn't cover that Coca-Cola sign. And so that's just one example of how a nonprofit organization who really doesn't have the skill set can partner with others who do and use their assets and bring them to bear to create affordable housing.
Awesome. Thank you for adding to that. I wish we had more time. This is a great discussion. We probably can talk about this for hours, but in the interest of time, and we appreciate you coming out, we're going to conclude. However, you have these gentlemen's information on the screen. Please feel free to take a screenshot. You can get them in the picture too, as well. But let's give another round of applause to them. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to thank each of you for attending. I also want to thank the TSW staff and consultants and our colleagues who helped make this event a success. We also appreciate our collaboration with Gwinnett County leadership and staff and their continued support and efforts to help coordinate this event and educate the community. I do have a few things I want to say before we wrap up. We are happy to offer approved AICP CM credits through our CM partnership with the Georgia Planning Association, which of course is an official chapter of the American Planning Association. So these credits are for AICP certified planners, and they're available for all 3 speaking series, which I will tell you those other dates shortly. All you have to do if you attended tonight is visit georgiaplanning.org to log your credits. Secondly, we also partnered with the American Institute of Architects, and if you are a member, you can self-report your attendance and education on the AIA.org website for learning units or elective credit for each speaker series that you attend. Now, if you did not get an opportunity to participate in the engagement activities in the lobby, please feel free to stop by the tables and provide your comments and recommendations and complete the surveys out there that's on the iPad or scan the QR code just to give your input, and we appreciate that. Next, I want you to save the dates. Write these dates down. You have June 28th. That's going to be our second Speak Up series with national keynote speakers Dan Burden of Blue Zones and Christian Inchuk of Green Print Partners. And that topic is going to be how infrastructure can keep Gwinnett green and healthy. Secondly, that third date is July 12th. That's our third Speak Up series. And we're going to have national keynote speakers Joe Menakazi of Urban 3 and Tony Jordan of the Parking Reform Network. And that topic is connecting communities through redevelopment. So we hope to see you at those events as well. Please spread the word, share the information on your networks. Also, continue to check GwinnettCounty.com for any upcoming opportunities, engagements, and thank you again for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.